I still remember the sound of laughter echoing through the marble hall that night, a laughter that didn't belong to me anymore, but to the man who once swore I was his forever. I stood there in silence, clutching the edge of the table, my heart trembling beneath the weight of betrayal, as his mistress raised a glass of red wine and with one cruel smile poured it over my white dress in front of everyone. The room went still, his smug grin widening as he said, "You should have known your place." And that was the moment I decided they would both regret every ounce of cruelty they showed me, no matter how powerful he thought he was, no matter how untouchable he felt in his billion-dollar empire. Because what he didn't know was that the contract he was celebrating that night, the one worth $8.4 billion, rested in my hands. And by morning, I'd make sure it was gone. The room filled with murmurs as I stood there drenched in crimson, the cold wine dripping down my fingers like blood. But I didn't flinch. I simply smiled, a small, controlled, almost eerie smile, and whispered, "You'll regret this," before walking out of the hall. They thought they humiliated me. They thought they'd broken me. But they didn't realize that I wasn't just his wife. I was his company's silent backbone, the one who built his credibility, who connected him to the biggest investors, who designed the deal he was now toasting. Every man in that room looked at me as if I was defeated, but I could already see their expressions change when I stepped out, because they knew, deep down, I had power they didn't understand. I could still hear their laughter fading behind me, and it burned in my chest, not as pain, but as fuel. I walked out into the cold night, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble echoing like a countdown. And as I got into the black car waiting outside, I looked at my reflection in the window, my mascara smeared, my dress ruined, and told myself, "You don't cry for men like him. You make them cry for you." I picked up my phone, dialed a number that hadn't heard from me in years, and when a familiar voice answered, I simply said, "It's time." That voice, calm and deep, replied, "I knew this day would come." The car drove through the city, lights blurring past like fading memories, and with every passing street I felt my fear dissolve into resolve. He thought I was weak because I loved him, but he forgot. Love is never weakness. It's what makes revenge precise. He met me when I was nothing, and I built everything for him, from the brand that carried his name to the deals that made him a billionaire, and in return, he gave me betrayal and humiliation. But tonight I wasn't the broken wife anymore. I was the storm that would wash away his empire, piece by piece. The next morning, the world outside looked calm, but inside me, there was a quiet fire that refused to die. I sat in my office, one floor below his, where I had worked in silence for years while he took the credit for everything I built. The assistants walked past me, whispering about the scandal from last night, pretending they didn't see me, pretending they didn't pity me. But I didn't need their sympathy. I needed their silence. My fingers moved over the keyboard, pulling up documents that only I had access to, contracts, signatures, wire transfers, the veins of his empire. He thought his mistress, that gold-draped woman who only knew how to sip champagne and smile for cameras, had replaced me. But she didn't know a single thing about the deals that kept his world afloat. As I scanned through the files, I stopped at one, the $8.4 billion contract he'd been celebrating. A global energy merger, the one I had negotiated in private meetings for months, the one signed only because of my credibility. The investors trusted me, not him. They didn't even know he had replaced me with a woman who thought a spreadsheet was a new fashion brand. My phone buzzed. A message from an old friend, Daniel, the voice I'd called last night. He was the one who had once loved me before my husband did, a man who understood me in ways my husband never could. But I left him because I thought love alone couldn't build a future. I thought power mattered more. Now I realized, love might not build empires, but it saves you when those empires burn. Daniel's message was simple. Your documents are ready. That was all I needed. I sent a quiet email, a single attachment that would start the storm. I watched the clock, 8:37 a.m. Upstairs, he would just be arriving in his glass office, sipping coffee, thinking the world was his. He didn't know the email I sent would trigger a chain reaction. a legal review that would void his contract within 48 hours. He had no idea that the woman he mocked last night now held the detonator to everything he had built. My heart didn't race. It beat slowly, steadily, like a hunter waiting for the perfect moment. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and remembered the first day we met. I was a young consultant, full of ideas, and he was charming, ambitious, and reckless. He promised me the world if I stood by his side, and I did. I gave him everything, my work, my vision, my trust. And now, sitting in the same office where we once dreamed together, I realized that dreams built on lies eventually collapse. Just then, my door opened without a knock. It was him. He looked tired, but his arrogance still clung to him like his designer suit. "You made quite the scene last night," he said, smirking. I looked up, silent. He leaned closer, his tone turning cold. "I told you not to embarrass me. Now investors are calling. They think you're losing control." I wanted to laugh. I was losing control. The irony almost hurt. "You should have thought of that before your mistress poured wine on me," I said quietly. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear behind his eyes. "That's over," he said. "You'll stay out of business affairs now. I've already arranged everything. You're done here." He turned to leave, but I said one sentence that made him stop mid-step. "Check your inbox." He froze for a second, his back still to me, and then slowly turned around, confusion flickering across his face as he pulled out his phone. I could see his thumb hover over the screen, his arrogance slipping away with each scroll. "What did you do?" he muttered, his voice lower now, cautious. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. His phone started buzzing almost instantly, one call after another lighting up the screen like sparks in dry grass. I sat there still as stone while he struggled to maintain composure. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "They can't. They wouldn't." But they could, and they did. Because I wasn't just his wife, I was the registered co-founder, and in the fine print of the merger contract, every major decision required dual consent. His signature alone wasn't enough. The investors trusted my approval more than his name, and I had just revoked it. Within hours, the news would spread. The biggest deal of his career was suddenly under legal review. I could almost hear the sound of dominoes falling in the distance. He finally looked up at me, anger boiling behind his eyes, but beneath it there was something else. Fear. "You don't know what you've done," he hissed. "You're destroying everything." I stood slowly, walking toward him, every step deliberate, my heels tapping against the floor like the sound of a gavel. "No," I said softly. "I'm just reminding you who built it." He wanted to shout, but before he could, his phone rang again. This time, the name flashing across the screen made him pale. "It was the investor himself," he answered, his voice trembling as he said, "Yes, Mr. Coleman, I can explain." But I could hear Coleman's fury even from where I stood. My husband's voice cracked, trying to piece together excuses, while his mistress's laughter from last night echoed in my head like a haunting tune. He hung up the phone, his face blank now. "They're pulling out," he whispered. "Do you understand what this means?" I nodded. "It means the same thing it meant when you let her humiliate me. You lose." I brushed past him, heading for the door, but he caught my arm. For a moment, I saw something real in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or the sudden realization that he had burned the only bridge holding him up. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking for the first time. I looked at him, this man who once kissed my forehead every morning, who now couldn't stand beside me without trying to control me. And I said, "Because I wanted you to remember that I was never the background of your story. I was the author." He released me slowly, and I walked out without looking back. Outside, the city was alive, buzzing with traffic and chatter, but I felt detached, as if I was walking through the end of a movie. My phone buzzed again. "Daniel." "It's done," he said. "They've initiated withdrawal." I let out a long breath. Not relief, but the kind of silence that comes after years of holding everything in. "Thank you," I said. He paused, then asked softly, "Was it worth it?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Revenge gives you power, but it also leaves you standing alone in the ashes of what you burned. As I crossed the street, a black car pulled up beside me. the same car that had taken me away last night. The driver opened the door, but before I got in, I glanced back at the tower of glass behind me. Somewhere on the top floor, he was probably collapsing under the weight of his own pride. Somewhere, the mistress who thought she'd won was realizing she had tied herself to a sinking ship. I got in the car, shut the door, and whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's tai. As the car glided through the city streets, I stared out the window, watching the skyline shimmer in the morning sun. Every building a reminder of how far we had climbed together, and how far we were about to fall. My mind wandered back to the early days before money twisted everything. I remembered the night he first told me his dream, to build something that would outlast us, to prove to the world he was more than just another ambitious man. Back then, I believed him. I believed in us. We worked late nights, shoulder to shoulder, eating takeout on the office floor, laughing about the future we were sure we'd own. But somewhere along the way, love turned into a competition. Success became his addiction, and I became just another possession he needed to display, until the day he met her. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was a mirror for his vanity. She made him feel young, untouchable, adored. I had seen it coming long before the affair began. I saw how his eyes wandered, how he started coming home late, how his touch grew colder. Still, I stayed, telling myself it was just a phase. But last night proved what I'd tried so hard to ignore, that the man I built a life with no longer existed. Now, as I rode past the same streets where we once dreamed, I realized my revenge wasn't just about humiliation, it was about justice, about taking back every piece of myself that he had stolen. My phone rang again. Daniel. His voice was steady but urgent. "You should see this," he said. "Turn on the news." I opened the feed and froze. The screen showed my husband's face, surrounded by reporters, flashes of cameras lighting up his pale, shaken expression. Headlines scrolled across the bottom. "Major investor withdraws. Billion-dollar merger on verge of collapse." My chest tightened, not out of guilt, but from the sheer weight of the moment. This was it. The empire he mocked me for leaving, now trembling under my silence. But then Daniel said something that made my blood run cold. "There's more," he said. "The board. They're blaming you." I frowned. "What?" "They found out your name is on the withdrawal. They think you sabotaged it out of personal revenge. He's telling them you went rogue." My pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the plan. I knew he'd panic, but I didn't expect him to turn the narrative so fast. In an instant, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the villain. I leaned back, the sound of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. "Let him talk," I said quietly. "He can spin stories all he wants. The truth is still mine." Daniel hesitated, then replied, "You sure you can handle what's coming? He's desperate now. Desperate men are dangerous." I closed my eyes. So am I. I hung up and turned my gaze back to the skyline. For the first time, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just fighting him anymore. I was fighting the part of myself that had loved him, that had once believed this empire was built for both of us. And in destroying him, I might destroy the last piece of that belief too. But it was too late to turn back. I whispered to my reflection, "You wanted a war. Now you have one." By afternoon, the storm had fully broken. Everywhere I looked, his name was being dragged through headlines, analysts debating what went wrong, investors panicking, employees whispering in hallways. The empire that once stood like a fortress now looked like a castle made of glass, cracking under pressure. I sat in my office, watching the news feed in silence, my reflection flickering across the screen. Calm on the surface, but trembling underneath. There's something strange about revenge. You imagine it will feel sweet, satisfying, complete. But when it arrives, it tastes like ash. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from an unknown number. I opened it and my breath caught. It was a photo. Him, sitting alone in his office, the same room where he once laughed with me, his head buried in his hands, the world crashing down around him. For a moment, I didn't see a billionaire or a cheater. I saw the man who once held me when I cried, the man who promised we'd face everything together. My fingers hesitated over the screen, a small ache pulling at my chest. But before I could even process it, another message followed, from his mistress. "Hope you're happy," it read. "You ruined him, and me." I stared at those words, my anger rising again. She ruined herself when she poured that wine. She chose cruelty when I had given her a chance to walk away. Still, something inside me shifted. I had wanted to destroy their pride, not their lives. But now, watching everything crumble, I realized the line between justice and vengeance had long vanished. I closed the phone, my thoughts spinning, and that's when the door burst open. It was him. No suit, no arrogance, just a broken man. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse. "Why?" he asked again, this time not in anger but in disbelief. "Why couldn't you just talk to me? Why did you have to ruin everything?" I wanted to laugh, to scream, to tell him how absurd that sounded, but instead I whispered, "Because you never listened." He took a step closer, his voice cracking. "I was wrong, all right. I got lost. I thought I could have it all. The company, the love, the thrill. But I lost control." He ran a hand through his hair, shaking. "You don't know what it's like watching everything you built vanish in a day." My heart clenched, but I forced myself to stay cold. "No," I said softly. "You don't know what it's like to watch your husband toast his mistress while she drenches you in humiliation." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "I didn't tell her to do that," he whispered. "But you laughed," I said. "And that was worse." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Finally, he sat down across from me, his voice barely audible. "They're canceling everything. The board's cutting me off. The media thinks I'm a fraud. You've won. Are you happy?" I looked at him, really looked, the man I had once loved more than life itself, and I realized how empty victory felt. I should have felt powerful, but all I saw was wreckage. "I didn't want to win," I said quietly. "I wanted you to understand." He leaned forward, his voice trembling. "I do now. I see what I did. I see how I broke you, but we can fix this, can't we?" His words lingered in the air, fragile, desperate. For a moment, I almost believed them. But then I remembered every tear, every lie, every moment he made me feel small. I shook my head slowly. "Some things can't be fixed." He dropped his gaze, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. The sight hit me harder than I expected. And as he stood to leave, shoulders slumped, I realized something. Even when you win, revenge doesn't heal. It only transfers the pain. That night, the rain returned. Soft at first, then harder, tapping against my windows like the sound of an old memory refusing to fade. I sat alone in the dark, watching the city lights blur behind streaks of water. My heart felt heavy but not broken, more like it had carried too much for too long. On the table beside me sat a folder, the last piece of the empire we built together, ownership records, shares, and signatures that still bore my name. One signature, one choice, and I could erase him completely, take everything he had left. The power was intoxicating, but also terrifying. I reached for the pen, but my hand trembled. Then my phone lit up. Daniel again. "They're offering you his position," he said. "You'll have full control by morning." My breath caught. After everything the empire I helped build, now mine. The poetic justice of it all almost made me smile. Almost. But before I could respond, another notification appeared. A video link sent anonymously. I tapped it, and there he was, my husband, standing outside the office building in the rain, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. He looked defeated, hollow. One reporter asked, "Do you blame your wife for the collapse?" He paused, rain dripping down his face, then whispered, "No, I blame myself." My hand froze. His voice was raw, stripped of pride, stripped of everything that once made him unbearable. For the first time in years, I heard truth. "She built this," he continued. "I broke it. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope she finds peace." The video ended. I stared at the screen, unable to move. Somewhere deep inside, the anger that had fueled me for so long began to crack. I turned toward the window, watching the rain, and whispered, "Peace doesn't come from winning." The next morning, I arrived at the board meeting. They were all there, the men who once ignored my ideas, now waiting for my approval. Papers were placed in front of me, pens ready, cameras outside. It was the moment every person in power dreams of, the final victory. But as I looked at the papers, I saw not success, but emptiness. Every name, every number, every deal, it all meant nothing if it came from pain. I stood up slowly, the room falling silent. "I'm withdrawing my claim," I said. The chairman frowned. "You're stepping down?" "No," I replied softly. "I'm walking away." They stared, stunned as I placed the pen down. "You can rebuild it," I told them. "Just do it without me." And before anyone could argue, I walked out, calm, steady, free. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. I turned my phone off, slipped it into my bag, and took one last look at the building that had defined my life. Then I walked away from it all. Days later, I heard he sold everything, donated the profits to charity, and disappeared from the spotlight. As for me, I started over, quietly. I bought a small house by the coast, planted a garden, and spent my mornings watching the sun rise instead of stock prices. Sometimes I still think of him. Not with hate, not with love, but with understanding. Because life taught me something I'll never forget. Revenge might give you justice, but forgiveness gives you freedom. And in the end, that freedom was worth more than $8.4 billion. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's the only way to remind the world that your peace is worth more than their power.